Escape from Alcatraz, 1962, USA. The Escape from Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary by Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin in June 1962 is the gold standard of prison break stories. Alcatraz, set on a lonely rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay, was designed to be escape-proof. The water was icy, the currents unforgiving, and the prison itself heavily guarded. Yet, that only made it a greater challenge for men determined never to die behind bars. Frank Morris, known for his intelligence and resourcefulness, joined forces with the Anglin brothers, expert bank robbers and strong swimmers from Florida. Months of meticulous planning went into the scheme. Behind the air vents in their cells was an unguarded utility corridor. With spoons stolen from the cafeteria, sharpened on the concrete floor, and a makeshift drill crafted from a broken vacuum cleaner motor, they widened the vents night after night, concealing their progress with painted cardboard grates. But tunneling was only the beginning. To fool guards during bed checks, they sculpted remarkably lifelike dummy heads from a mix of soap, toilet paper, and real hair gathered from the barber shop. These decoys bought them precious hours of unnoticed freedom during their escape. On the night of June 11, 1962, the men slipped through their enlarged vents. They climbed the utility corridor, shimmied up a 30-foot ventilation shaft, broke onto the roof, descended a drainpipe, and finally reached the shoreline. There they unveiled their final stroke of genius, a raft and life vests fashioned from more than 50 stolen raincoats, painstakingly stitched and glued with contact cement. They pushed into the black waters of San Francisco Bay and vanished. Despite the largest manhunt in Alcatraz history, no bodies were ever recovered. Officially, the FBI claimed they drowned, but rumors of survival have persisted for decades. Some believe the Anglin brothers made it to South America. Their daring escape exposed critical flaws in the prison's security and hastened Alcatraz's closure less than a year later. To this day, the fate of the three men remains one of the greatest mysteries in American crime history. The Great Escape, 1944, Germany. During World War II, in the frozen heart of Nazi-occupied Poland, Allied prisoners of war conceived a plan so daring it would be remembered for generations. Stalag Luft III, a high-security German POW camp, was considered escape-proof, barracks raised on stilts to prevent tunneling, vigilant guards, a remote, unforgiving landscape. But inside the camp, the prisoners were determined not only to escape, but to humiliate the Nazi regime in the process. Their plan, breathtaking in scope, dig not one but 3 tunnels codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. They scavenged and improvised. Bed slats for support beams, tin cans repurposed into ventilation ducts, Red Cross packages, cover for smuggling tools and materials. Each tunnel stretched over 300 feet, deep enough to evade detection by ground microphones. To deal with the excavated sand, they devised penguin pouches worn inside trousers, enabling them to discreetly scatter dirt around the camp, one slow step at a time. After months of back-breaking labor, the tunnel Harry was ready. On the night of March 24, 1944, 200 prisoners were scheduled to crawl to freedom. But fate intervened. Snow covered the ground, slowing movement. The tunnel's exit fell just short of the forest tree line, too close to patrolling guards. By sunrise, 76 men had made it through before the breakout was discovered. The fallout was brutal. Of the 76 escapees, 73 were recaptured, and 50 were executed on direct orders from Hitler himself, a war crime that outraged the world. Only 3 men truly escaped to freedom. 2 reached neutral Sweden, 1 made it to Spain. Though tragic in outcome, the Great Escape became a timeless symbol, a testament to defiance, ingenuity, and indomitable spirit. Even in captivity, even under tyranny, the human will to be free can't be caged. It wasn't just an escape, it was an act of resistance, carried out with brilliance, bravery, and unbreakable resolve. El Chapo's Tunnel Escape, 2015, Mexico. Few escapes in modern history demonstrate the power of wealth and influence like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's 2015 breakout from Altiplano, Mexico's most secure prison. El Chapo, ruthless leader of the Sinaloa cartel, had been captured before and bribed his way out. So when authorities recaptured him in 2014, they swore he would never escape again. What followed proved them spectacularly wrong. Beneath Altiplano's heavily guarded surface, El Chapo's associates were already at work, quietly engineering one of the most audacious prison escapes ever attempted. Over the course of a year, cartel engineers dug a tunnel nearly a mile long, starting from a farmhouse outside the prison perimeter and ending directly beneath the shower in Guzman's cell. And this was no rough hole in the ground. The passage was equipped with electric lights, ventilation pipes, even a motorcycle mounted on rails used to ferry tools, supplies, and earth back and forth. On the night of July 11, 2015, El Chapo calmly entered the shower, the only blind spot in his cell's surveillance camera, and then he vanished. By the time guards noticed something was wrong, he was already speeding through the tunnel. He emerged in a half-built construction site beyond the prison walls and disappeared into the countryside. The escape humiliated the Mexican government, exposing not only the failure of their inescapable prison, but the deep corruption that had made such a feat possible. Though El Chapo was recaptured in 2016 and extradited to the United States, his 2015 tunnel escape remains legendary. It wasn't just a breakout, it was a demonstration of what limitless money and criminal genius could accomplish. A reminder that for some, even the walls of a maximum security fortress are no match for a well-dug tunnel and the will to be free. The Maze Prison Break, 1983, Northern Ireland. On September 25, 1983, the Maze Prison in Northern Ireland, also known as Long Kesh, witnessed the largest prison escape in British history. The prison was infamous, housing members of the Irish Republican Army, IRA. Prisoners who were highly disciplined, politically motivated, and determined to continue their fight for independence, even from behind bars. The maze was supposed to be escape-proof, a maximum security fortress with layers of gates, armed towers, constant surveillance, but the prisoners had other plans. For months, IRA inmates smuggled in weapons, disguises, and intelligence. They crafted makeshift knives, acquired smuggled firearms, studied guard patterns and routines. Their goal? Overwhelm staff, hijack a prison food lorry, and smash their way through the fortified gates. On the afternoon of the escape, it happened with military precision. Dozens of inmates launched a coordinated assault on guards inside their block. Hostages were taken, uniforms stolen, and the food lorry theirs. In a burst of chaos, 38 prisoners stormed the vehicle, rammed through multiple gates, and drove straight out of one of the most secure prisons in Europe. It took less than an hour. The aftermath was bloody and chaotic. One prison officer died of a heart attack during the escape. Many others were stabbed or beaten. A massive manhunt followed. Helicopters overhead, roadblocks across the countryside, thousands of soldiers deployed throughout Northern Ireland. Within weeks, most escapees were recaptured, but some vanished, reappearing years later overseas. The Maze breakout wasn't just a prison escape, it was a political earthquake. It exposed vulnerabilities in Britain's most secure prison, embarrassed the government, and became a powerful propaganda victory for the IRA. The escape remains etched in history not only for its scale, but as a chilling reminder that in the right hands, even the strongest walls can crumble. John Dillinger's wooden gun escape, 1934 USA. John Dillinger, the notorious Depression-era gangster, wasn't just a bank robber. He was a folk legend of American crime. By 1934, Dillinger had become public enemy number one, hunted by the FBI and known across the country. But even in prison, he refused to be caged. What he pulled off in March of that year remains one of the boldest, most theatrical escapes in U.S. history. Locked inside the Crown Point Jail in Indiana, a facility touted as escape-proof, Dillinger quietly began crafting his plan. With scraps of wood, possibly smuggled in or carved from a washboard, he fashioned a pistol. To make it convincing, he stained it with shoe polish, giving it the dark gleam of cold steel. To the guards, it looked real enough to kill. On March 3, Dillinger made his move. Armed with his wooden gun, he confronted guards, pressing the fake weapon into their ribs, and demanded the keys. Believing their lives were at stake, they complied. Within minutes, Dillinger had taken control of the cell block. He locked guards inside, armed himself with real guns from the prison arsenal, and brazenly walked out the front door, stealing the sheriff's car for his getaway. The escape humiliated law enforcement and cemented Dillinger's status as a criminal mastermind. Newspapers across the nation splashed the story, painting him as both villain and rogue anti-hero. The sheer audacity of using a carved wooden gun turned Dillinger into a symbol of daring defiance, especially during an era when many Americans, crushed by the Great Depression, secretly cheered outlaws who thumbed their noses at authority. Though Dillinger was eventually tracked down and killed by federal agents later that year, his wooden gun escape remains one of the most unforgettable prison breaks in history. A feat of ingenuity and nerve that turned a simple piece of wood into a ticket to freedom. Michel Vaujour's helicopter escape, 1986, France. Few prison escapes in history have the romance and cinematic flair of Michel Vaujour's breakout from a Paris prison in 1986. Vaujour, a convicted armed robber with a reputation for daring stunts, had already attempted several escapes during his time behind bars. But what he pulled off in May 1986 stunned France and captivated the world. At the heart of the escape was his wife, Nadine. While Michel planned meticulously inside the prison walls, Nadine prepared for her role outside. She took flying lessons, learned to pilot a helicopter, and eventually hijacked a small craft with the help of accomplices. On May 26, she guided the stolen helicopter over Paris, heading straight for the roof of the Santé prison, one of the most secure facilities in the country. Inside, Michel was ready. Armed with little more than determination and desperation, he forced his way onto the roof, where Nadine hovered the helicopter in a dangerous balancing act. Under the astonished eyes of guards and fellow inmates, Michel leapt aboard. In seconds, the helicopter lifted off, soaring over the prison walls and out of reach of the authorities. For weeks, Michel and Nadine lived as fugitives, symbols of outlaw romance. The criminal mastermind and the devoted wife who risked everything to free him. But freedom was fleeting. In July 1986, Michel was tracked down and shot 5 times during a police raid, surviving but left critically injured. Nadine was later arrested and served time for her role in the escape. Despite its brief success, the Vaujour escape remains legendary. The sight of a helicopter swooping onto a prison roof in the heart of Paris felt more like Hollywood than real life. It highlighted both the ingenuity of escape artists and the vulnerability of even the most fortified prisons. More than a crime story, it became a tale of passion, loyalty, and breathtaking audacity. Pascal Payet's Helicopter Escapes, 2001 to 2007, France. When it comes to cinematic escapes, few rival the exploits of Pascal Payet, a French criminal whose mastery of helicopter getaways made him infamous worldwide. Payet, convicted of murder and robbery, was first imprisoned in the early 2000s. But prison walls meant little to a man with the imagination and connections to look skyward for freedom. In October 2001, while serving a lengthy sentence, Payet staged his first helicopter escape from a prison in southern France. Accomplices hijacked a helicopter, landed it on the roof, and whisked him away in broad daylight. Authorities were stunned, but Payet's audacity didn't end there. After being recaptured in 2003, he pulled off an even more daring stunt, organizing a helicopter rescue for 3 fellow inmates from the same prison where he'd once escaped. Each time, authorities tightened security, moving him to different facilities, increasing surveillance, vowing he would never repeat his exploits. Yet, in July 2007, Payet defied them again. From a high-security prison in Grasse, he orchestrated his most famous breakout. Armed accomplices hijacked yet another helicopter, landed on the prison roof, and spirited him away within minutes. Guards were powerless against an attack from the sky. Though Payet was eventually recaptured and remains behind bars, his string of helicopter escapes became the stuff of legend. They revealed a glaring weakness in prison security. While walls, fences, and guards could deter land-based escapes, the skies remained vulnerable. After his escapes, France introduced new measures, including rooftop netting, to prevent copycat attempts. Pascal Payet's story feels ripped straight from a Hollywood film. The image of a helicopter swooping into a prison yard, plucking a man from captivity, and vanishing into the horizon is pure cinematic spectacle. Yet it happened not once, but multiple times. His daring flights to freedom remain among the most creative and jaw-dropping prison escapes in modern history. Richard Lee McNair's Mailbag Escape, 2006, USA. Richard Lee McNair wasn't the most notorious criminal in America, but he earned a reputation as one of its cleverest escape artists. Convicted of murder and serving a life sentence, McNair engineered 3 separate prison escapes. His most famous, and arguably the most ingenious, occurred in 2006 at a federal penitentiary in Pollock, Louisiana. McNair's plan relied not on violence, not on helicopters, but on patience, precision, and a willingness to think outside the box. Literally. Assigned to work in a prison workshop, he devised a scheme to mail himself out of prison. Over time, he constructed a specially designed escape pod, hidden inside a stack of shrink-wrapped mail bags bound for delivery outside the prison. The pod had a breathing tube, and just enough space for him to squeeze inside and wait. On April 5, 2006, McNair climbed into his makeshift crate, sealed himself in, and was loaded onto a pallet with other mailbags. Forklifts carried him past fences, past guards, past razor wire, and finally onto a delivery truck that drove right out of the prison gates. Hours later, McNair simply cut himself free and walked away. The brilliance of the escape lay in its simplicity. No explosions, no disguises, no weapons. Just a man, hidden in plain sight, relying on the assumption that no one would think to check the prison's own outgoing shipments. McNair remained on the run for over a year, traveling across the United States and Canada. His freedom came to an end in 2007 when Canadian police finally caught him after a high-speed chase. But his mailbag escape remains one of the most jaw-dropping prison breaks in modern history, a story of cunning over brute force. Even law enforcement grudgingly admitted a degree of admiration for his creativity. McNair proved that sometimes the simplest ideas, executed with patience and nerve, can make the most brilliant escapes. Choi Gap-bok, the yoga master, escaped 2012, South Korea. Some escapes rely on tools, tunnels, or helicopters, but in 2012, a South Korean man named Choi Gap-bok demonstrated that sometimes all you need is an extraordinary body and a flexible mind. Known as the yoga master, Choi was a seasoned criminal with over 20 convictions, but it was his acrobatic escape from a Daegu police station that made him famous worldwide. Choi, then 50 years old, was being held in a small cell after arrest for robbery. Unlike maximum security prisons, the local cell wasn't designed to contain an escape artist. The key feature? A food slot, a narrow opening in the cell door, just 15 centimeters, about 6 inches high, and 45 centimeters, about 18 inches wide. To most people, it was just a tray pass. To Choi, it was a doorway to freedom. Using his yoga training and remarkable flexibility, Choi began to contort his body. In the dead of night, while guards were distracted, he dislocated his shoulders, flattened his chest, and slowly slid his frame through the tiny slot. It took less than a minute. On the other side, he quietly stood, stretched, and simply walked out of the police station. No tools, no accomplices, just the human body, reduced to liquid flexibility. For 6 days, Choi evaded capture, sparking headlines around the globe. Eventually, he was tracked down and rearrested, but by then he had already achieved a strange kind of fame. The escape earned him the nickname Korean Houdini, and videos recreating his feat went viral. Unlike elaborate heists or violent breakouts, Choi's story fascinates because of its simplicity and strangeness. It's almost unbelievable, a 50-year-old man squeezing his entire body through an opening designed for dinner trays. His escape proved that sometimes the most effective prison breaks aren't about brute force or high-tech engineering, but about exploiting the smallest oversight with a body trained for the impossible. Mark DeFriest, the Houdini of Florida, 1980s USA. Mark DeFriest isn't a household name like Dillinger or El Chapo, but within prison walls he became a legend. Nicknamed the Houdini of Florida, DeFriest earned notoriety not for a single great escape, but for a series of clever, relentless attempts that made him a nightmare for prison authorities. DeFriest's troubles began in 1978 when he was arrested for taking tools left to him by his late father. Instead of probation, he received a harsh sentence. His inability to adapt to prison life, combined with what psychologists later described as an extraordinary mechanical genius, set him on a path of defiance. From the early 1980s onward, DeFriest repeatedly tried to outsmart the system. In one escape, he memorized the shape of guards' keys, then fashioned perfect copies out of toothpaste tubes, metal scraps, and other discarded items. In another attempt, he scaled razor wire fences using makeshift padding he designed himself. He even once used soap shavings and wax to create working molds for locks. Each time, he was caught, but each attempt became more daring than the last. Over the years, he earned a reputation among fellow inmates as a folk hero, a man who refused to accept confinement, using nothing but ingenuity and persistence to battle the system. To authorities, however, he was a dangerous escape artist, someone who could never be trusted. Instead of rehabilitation, his repeated breakouts earned him decades of added time, transforming a relatively short sentence into what amounted to life behind bars. Documentaries later cast DeFriest as both genius and tragic figure, a man with skills that could have made him an inventor or engineer, trapped instead in a cycle of defiance and punishment. His story highlights not just one escape, but the mindset of someone who simply could not stop trying. In that way, Mark DeFriest stands as a reminder that sometimes the most fascinating prison break stories aren't about freedom at all, but about the unstoppable urge to resist captivity. Vrba and Wetzler's Auschwitz escape, 1944, Poland. Amid the horrors of the Holocaust, two young Slovak Jews achieved one of the most important and courageous escapes in history. Rudolf Vrba, 19, and Alfred Wetzler, 25, were prisoners in Auschwitz, the Nazi death camp where over 1 million people were murdered. In April 1944, they carried out a desperate plan not only to save themselves, but to warn the world of the genocide taking place inside. The escape was carefully prepared. Fellow inmates helped hide the two men in a hollowed-out woodpile near the camp's perimeter, a hiding place camouflaged with boards and debris. To throw off guard dogs, they soaked tobacco and petrol around the hiding spot, masking their scent. For 3 days, they lay motionless in their wooden coffin, while guards searched fruitlessly for them. When the search was finally called off, they crawled out under cover of darkness and began a harrowing 11-day journey on foot. Hungry, exhausted, constantly at risk of capture. But they pressed on. At last, they reached Slovakia. There, with the help of Jewish community leaders, they compiled a detailed 32-page report of Auschwitz's operations, including the existence of gas chambers, crematoria, and the Nazis' plan to deport Hungarian Jews en masse. This became known as the Vrba-Wetzler report, one of the first credible accounts of the Holocaust to reach the outside world. The report helped to slow, though not stop, the deportation of Hungarian Jews and remains one of the most vital documents of the Holocaust era. While not a prison break in the traditional sense, their escape transcended survival. It was an act of resistance, truth-telling, and humanity in the face of monstrous evil. Vrba and Wetzler's bravery showed that even in the darkest place on earth, courage could shine through. Their escape remains one of the most meaningful and impactful in history. The Libby prison escape, 1864 USA Civil War. During the American Civil War, Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia was one of the Confederacy's most notorious prisons. Packed with Union officers, it was a place of disease, starvation, and despair. Yet in February 1864, it became the site of one of the most extraordinary mass escapes in U.S. history. The escape was masterminded by Colonel Thomas Rose, a captured Union officer. Together with fellow prisoners, Rose devised a plan to tunnel their way out of the converted tobacco warehouse that served as the prison. The task was daunting, the building was heavily guarded, and the men were weak from malnutrition. But desperation breeds ingenuity. Working by candlelight, prisoners dug through a rat-infested basement to reach the earth outside. Using crude tools, pocket knives, broken canteens, and bare hands, they carved a tunnel nearly 50 feet long. To conceal their efforts, they carried dirt in their pockets and scattered it in the prison yard, much like the POWs of the later Great Escape. The work took weeks, carried out in stifling air and constant fear of discovery. On the night of February 9, 1864, the tunnel was ready. One by one, prisoners crawled through the narrow passage and emerged outside the prison walls. In total, 109 Union officers wriggled to freedom in a single night, an astonishing feat given the conditions. Of these, 59 successfully reached Union lines, 48 were recaptured, and 2 drowned in the James River while attempting to cross. News of the Libby prison escape spread quickly, boosting morale in the North and embarrassing the Confederacy. It showed that even under the most oppressive circumstances, determination and teamwork could overcome impossible odds. Today, the Libby prison escape is remembered as a Civil War epic, not just a tale of ingenuity but also of hope. For the men trapped in the hell of Libby, the tunnel wasn't merely a way out of prison, it was a way back to life, liberty, and the cause they were willing to die for. Billy Hayes' escape from Turkey, 1975, Turkey. Billy Hayes was just 23 years old when he was arrested in 1970 at Istanbul airport for attempting to smuggle hashish out of Turkey. What began as a reckless adventure quickly turned into a nightmare. Sentenced to 30 years in prison, Hayes found himself trapped in the brutal Turkish penal system, shuffled between notorious prisons like Sakmalklar and Emrali. His ordeal would later inspire the book and film Midnight Express, but the real escape story is even more compelling. Life in Turkish prisons was harsh. Beatings, disease, and overcrowding were daily realities. Hayes spent years plotting, constantly scheming and searching for weaknesses. In 1975, after a failed appeal left him facing an indefinite sentence, he decided he had nothing left to lose. His chance came when he was transferred to Emrali prison, an island facility with slightly looser security. There, Hayes began studying the routines of guards and mapping out the geography of the island. One stormy night, he slipped away, stealing a rowboat and paddling furiously across treacherous waters. After reaching the mainland, he disguised himself, stole food, and evaded capture while making his way north. With grit and determination, he crossed into Greece, finally free after 5 years of captivity. Hayes' escape became legendary, not only for the drama of his journey but for the cultural storm it inspired. His memoir and the subsequent film painted Turkish prisons as hellish, sparking international outrage and political tension. Hayes himself later admitted the film exaggerated some horrors, but his real escape was no less remarkable. For Hayes, the breakout was not just about survival, it was about reclaiming life after years of despair. His story remains one of the most famous drug-related prison escapes ever told, a cautionary tale of youthful recklessness turned into a desperate, heroic struggle for freedom. Ronnie Biggs and the Great Train Robbers Escape, 1965, UK. Ronnie Biggs was already infamous by the mid-1960s, a central figure in the Great Train Robbery of 1963, where a gang stole over $2.6 million, a staggering sum at the time. Sentenced to 30 years in prison, Biggs had no intention of serving it. In July 1965, he staged one of the boldest breakouts in British history. Biggs was held at Wandsworth Prison, a grim Victorian fortress in London. With the help of 3 accomplices on the outside, he carefully orchestrated his escape. On the appointed day, he scaled a 30-foot perimeter wall using a rope ladder thrown down from above. Once over, he dropped onto a waiting furniture van and was whisked away to freedom. The entire operation took just minutes, leaving guards stunned. From there, Biggs began a life on the run that would last nearly 4 decades. He fled first to Paris, where he underwent plastic surgery to change his appearance, then traveled to Australia and eventually to Brazil. In Rio de Janeiro, he lived openly, even becoming a minor celebrity. British authorities tried repeatedly to extradite him, but Brazil's laws and Biggs's relationship with a Brazilian woman protected him. For years, he taunted the British establishment, giving interviews, recording songs, and enjoying the strange status of a folk anti-hero. Some saw him as a charming rogue, others as an unrepentant criminal. In 2001, aging and ailing, Biggs voluntarily returned to the UK, where he was rearrested and sent back to prison. He spent his final years behind bars before being released on compassionate grounds in 2009. Ronnie Biggs's escape wasn't the most technically complex, but it was audacious. And his decades-long life as a fugitive turned it into one of the most talked-about breakouts in British history. His story captured the imagination because it blurred the line between crime and legend, rebellion and celebrity. Dieter Dengler's POW, Escape, 1966, Laos. In 1966, during the height of the Vietnam War, U.S. Navy pilot Dieter Dengler was shot down over Laos. Captured by the Pathet Lao, he was imprisoned in a jungle camp alongside several other POWs. The camp was little more than bamboo cages and crude huts surrounded by dense, unforgiving wilderness. Conditions were brutal. Starvation, beatings, and disease were constant companions. Escape seemed impossible. Yet for Dengler, surrender was never an option. From the moment he was captured, he studied his surroundings, quietly preparing. He fashioned makeshift tools, memorized guard routines, and encouraged fellow prisoners to join him in plotting a breakout. By June, after months of deprivation, their chance arrived. Armed with stolen machetes and sheer desperation, the group launched their escape. The breakout was swift and violent. They overpowered guards, seizing weapons and food, and fled into the jungle. But freedom brought new challenges. The Laotian wilderness was a hellscape: monsoons, leeches, treacherous terrain. One by one, Dengler's companions died or were recaptured. Alone, emaciated, weak, Dengler pushed on, surviving on snails, insects, and whatever he could find. After 23 harrowing days in the jungle, Dengler stumbled into a clearing, where he spotted a U.S. rescue plane overhead. Signaling desperately, he was finally rescued, weighing barely 90 pounds, but alive. Dieter Dengler's escape was not just a physical triumph, but a story of unbreakable will. Unlike criminals breaking free from prison, Dengler's flight was from a living nightmare of war. His survival became a symbol of resilience, later inspiring the documentary Little Dieter Needs to Fly and the feature film Rescue Dawn. His ordeal remains one of the most remarkable escape stories of the Vietnam era, a tale of courage, ingenuity, and the indomitable human spirit refusing to die in captivity. From the icy waters of Alcatraz to the jungles of Laos, these stories remind us of the extraordinary lengths people will go to for freedom. Some escapes were daring, some bizarre, and some changed history itself, but all of them prove that even the strongest walls and the sharpest barbed wire can't fully contain the human spirit. Which of these escapes did you find the most incredible? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this dive into history's most daring breakouts, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story of human ingenuity and resilience. After all, as these escapees proved, nothing is truly impossible.